Well, I'm hoping the sound quality will be better. Maybe, maybe not. So, apologize for that one. This morning, it is May 6th, 2023. It is Saturday morning, time index 9:03 in the morning, Pacific Standard Time. Several hours ago, I woke up to watch the coronation of King Charles III of Great Britain, yes. And they were watching it on a lot of channels picked up on it. I just wish I had the BBC. That would have been something. But I don't have the BBC. But I was watching the coronation of how Prince Charles came to be, and it took him several months since the death of Queen Elizabeth II. I had to go to bed, and also I had to get my phone charged up. It was just too much. But I watched it. The pomp and circumstances. But, after he got into the coach, or just getting into the coach, after being coronated, that was it. I had to go back to bed. I had to sleep. Because I know they were showing everybody else, and it would be another 2 hours. My phone was not going to live up to that. And neither was the room on my phone. So, I went to sleep. But I don't think Americans get it. I don't think the Americans get it, how this affects them a great deal. This is part of them, as much as it is part of us. It's part of our own history. We consider us Americans, and therefore we broke away from England, and we don't have any connections to them. But we have connections to them. We have connections to them. There was a hell of a lot of people in England who had just seen in their lifetime a coronation of a monarch. Now, maybe some of them didn't exactly like monarchies, but the rest of them are British. You're probably going to be asking me, what's that mean? It's part of your blood. It's part of your traditions. It's part of your life. It's part of your past. It's part of you. It's part of the identity. And the crowds are we're scattered about right now, and it's about 5 after 5. They're going to be having state dinners and stuff like that for all the officials to say, "Congratulations, Charles Boy, you've made it into the rulership. How does it feel? You may call him King Charles, not just Charles." It may be a little bit stuffy at that point, but I would be too if I was just crowned king and someone was going to try to get that kind of chummy with me, except for his wife. You may call me Your Majesty. I have a hell of a lot of respect for the Brits. I do. For those who are across the pond, they say. And they used to joke with us as being the colonials, or the lost colony. Or the lost colonies, actually. But there was, as I said before, there is people out there who don't want a continuation of royalty. They'd rather have the democracy go on and not the representation of royalty at all. And there had been arrests happening over there. The difference between America and us, even though if we make protest, as long as our protest was peaceful enough, the government system would have a right to listen to us because of our First Amendment. Unfortunately, they don't have those kind of rights over there in England. But I also have to make you understand something. Part of my heritage, most of my heritage is of England, of Ireland, and of Scotland, and unfortunately of Germany. It was a dark past, but there's also a dark past between Scotland and Ireland and England. A lot of it. England has still the British monarchy still has issues in its own royalty, in its own family. That even Prince Harry was sitting in the third row of the ceremony and not part. I mean, he's there as a representative because he's also the son of King Charles, but for whatever reasons, probably for visualizations or something like that, it just is probably embarrassing for the monarchy for Prince Harry to be there. That's just a side note right there. Because I was checking out CNN and they're still talking about it right now. And there's still people out, tourists and Brits, still interviewing people and trying to get close to the monarchy at this point. Outside the gates of Buckingham Palace. I'm part of England in my heritage and in my lineage. I'm also American. Lineage and heritage. When I got out of high school, I went over to college. And instead of studying U.S. history more in depth, I switched over to English history. I wanted to see what was going on. Why was it so important for us to do this kind of stuff? What the hell happened in England that made us do what we had to do? I mean, I heard and read about King George III. Okay, fine. Well, what about the monarchy? All the things were reflected to it. I never studied history and never understood about the English life, folklore, literature. Yeah, but even through the literature, I was studying about how they lived, how they were in the times when the author would write about. So I had to study about the past. I had at least 2 classes of it. The second class bored the shit out of me because I had a professor who almost put me to sleep with his monotone voice. Kept talking about backstabbings left and right in the dark ages of the British Empire. It just didn't impress upon me. It should have. It should have. I wanted to understand the Brits during those days. And I guess maybe I got bummed out a bit. But the Brits of today are a lot different than they were back then. There's more contention and more disagreement with the Crown than with what the Crown's been trying to do. For decades, there had been some protests, there have been grumblings about the monarchy sucking in more money than what they do deliver. And right now they're only symbolic and tradition of old England and of what England had stood for centuries ago when they started up their kingdoms. I mean, it was a complete free-for-all on that small island when you have different fiefdoms over here trying to fight for the crown to rule over this one, or maybe a little bit of an empire of an island. But how this island had affected us. Most of our immigrants came from Europe. And we did have our own fair share coming from England, going over the pond, the Atlantic Ocean, into the new land, which would be later on called Manifest Destiny, the United States of America. But we have to understand that the immigrants coming over back then were probably in the same boat as we are right now, that we have the immigrants coming over here. And it's political nightmare when we have this anger and hostility towards our own descendants coming from the other places just to settle into the new land. We're still rapidly filling up our cities and towns out there. And still people want the principles that we lived under for a long while. Right now we're redefining and redesigning those damn principles that I'm not quite sure if anybody else wants to come over here and survive. Comparing the pomp and circumstance of England to the United States, we go through a presidential shift every 4 years. You have to be like the candidate; they'll stay there for another 4 years max, because of our laws that we've already set up, and what we've also put into place into the Constitution of the United States when it was originally drafted, right after the Articles of Confederation. Nobody thought to think about putting a term limit for our politicians. They didn't have long lives. They didn't. 50, 60. Hell, they're lucky enough, maybe 70 before they keeled over. But in this circumstance that we have right now, we had put in the term limits after, I think, before World War II ended. And we had to have that amendment in there. I mean, third term for a president for 12 years in office, died in office. But there was reasons and circumstances for Roosevelt anyway. They don't have term limits when it comes down for the monarchy. If they feel like they're going to step down, they're going to step down and have the surviving member take over. But the monarchy is not the absolute ruler of England, not for a couple of centuries, because Parliament had been taken over more in authoritative powers from the monarchy. Unlike the United States, which is supposed to have three check balance system here, that seems to be, always under constant revision here, apparently, depending on which particular group of people we have in there are trying to run the country or trying to rule the country as a monarchy and not as a democracy. And the pomp and circumstances between royalty of England and us, we're on a routine clock. Every 4 years, we're going to have a president, whoever or whatever, from Congress, actually from the White House, to Congress, Congress, back to the White House. It's like about quarter to nearly half mile, maybe somewhere in that time. So every 4 years we get to see this going on. We'll see the pomp and circumstances, people waving the flags, yay, right along Pennsylvania, yeah. But this is like a once-in-a-lifetime thing regarding England. Because how many people have we seen in our lifetime have been crowned into the monarchy? In my mother's lifetime, maybe once. Queen Elizabeth II, a young woman moving into the monarchy, and she had already been doing her bit for king and country in World War II, being a nurse. So she was doing her bit for king and country during that time in royalty, and crowned, and then we had the pomp and circumstance during that time. I think it was back in 1953, I think. And that was well before my brother's time. So my mother and my brother, God rest their souls, have missed an opportunity in life to see this. we're going to. I guess for the next day, they're going to be talking about anything and everything concerning about England, politics, and everything else. I just wanted to get my fair share of my 2 cents on this thing because besides charging up the phone, I'm going to be putting the videos out there, and I'm hoping that people will be able to listen to it. I'm going to be apologizing for the visuals on it. I'm working with what I've got. I don't think people really understand the things that happen in England also affect us here. And they also understand that America affects them a great deal in more ways than one. We had developed throughout a century or two of more and more of a tie of a relationship with each other. We're not in the situation of being ruled by a monarchy. We still got our own government system here. We're not giving that up without anything else. But we realize that England by itself is still a powerful ally. It is a powerful ally. Some people say, well, what's it all about? Long-term friendship, history with each other at this point. Some people may think that we may or may not stay with England. We need all the allies we can get. Because of all the international stuff happening right now in the world, we need friends. We need allies to back us up, and we'll back them up. Watch each other's six, so to speak. And this in a way has to force us to wake up of what's happening around us. I look at English history. I see my past. I see how things have changed. If my ancestors hadn't been born in the United States, 2 or 3 generations, maybe longer than that, I probably would have been in England. Well, maybe Ireland or Scotland or something like that. But no, I was born American. Generations have already passed since the formation of the 13 colonies into our country right now. So we're living in this kind of world. Yes, I have a fascination with the Brits to a point. I mean, I love the writing. Certain things I got into. Current writers of 20th and 21st century. Shakespeare was never one of my biggest things to get into. To tell you the truth, to be honest about it. Watching the British mysteries and science fiction shows, I got into. And then listening to how the House of Commons compared to what the House of Representatives out here in the United States are. My God. They're almost just as rambunctious and idiotic. Except they're a little bit more wilder. But they try to keep their decorum. They're a lot more rambunctious than the House of Representatives than we realize, but sometimes I can't tell the difference. So it's crazy. But here I am seeing in my own lifetime the pomp and circumstances of an installation of a king to England. The Church of England coronation. Every ruler, either queen or king, had to be recognized by the Church of England, Church of State. Now, it used to be either by divine right or by conquest that the throne of England was won over. Either they held in divinity or they weren't, and they had to prove themselves. So they had to conquer. These days, they don't do that anymore. But there is a lot of talk over the past several decades of people asking and trying to demand of their English government, the British government. Let's use the correct terminology here. Why they should keep supporting the monarchy. What a good have they done? Just a drain on the resources. Okay, speaking of which. I'm going to put my headset next to it.
Demographic, religious, and societal change, raising questions about the relevance of the monarchy today. 1953 was full of post-war joie de vivre and excitement about a new young queen. They've come to cease work in Britain. Despite waves of historic migration, Britain in the 1950s was overwhelmingly white, Christian, and divided along class lines in society and the halls of power. Today, 3 of the 4 great offices of state, including the Prime Minister, are from minority backgrounds. 20% of the population today are from ethnic minority backgrounds too, and rising, many from countries subject to exploitation in the former British Empire. The monarchy itself has to find a respectful and humble place for itself without pretending that it doesn't have all of its privilege, all of its history, and all of its baggage. Though crumbling slowly after the Second World War, Britain was still stratified along class lines in the 1950s. The home entails denote rank. A duchess, for example, wears 4 robes. Modern Britain is in many ways allergic to the idea of inherited privilege. Society at least strives to be egalitarian. But a recent poll commissioned by the BBC, Britain's national broadcaster, suggests that King Charles might have a problem appealing to young people, 38% of whom said that they would support an elected head of state. And indifference might be a problem too. 78% said they weren't interested in the royal family.
I think it's definitely time to rethink, and I know a lot of people loved Queen Elizabeth, and I don't think that same fondness is there for King Charles.
The monarch, since the 16th century, is also titular head of the Church of England. In 1953, the majority of the country was Christian. Today, it is half that, with the number of non-religious and non-Christian faiths rising each year, with multi-faith leaders playing a role in the coronation for the first time. King Charles, who has declared himself to be defender of all faiths, was honoured here at Britain's largest mosque ahead of the coronation. So could this be an opportunity for all the communities in Britain to come together?
In Islam, we're taught that part of your faith is loyalty to your nation. And we also know that the coronation is part of history of this nation. And as citizens, we respect that history.
The coronation is a litmus test for how King Charles will be received by 2023 Britain, and whether enthusiasm, apathy, or opposition to the monarchy will shape his reign. Bianca Nobilo, CNN, London.
And we'll have more coronation coverage straight ahead. Stay with us.
Okay, so you have to understand this. You really have to understand this. Their history is tied in with U.S. history. Their current status is tied in with U.S. status right now. Whatever happens in England is going to be affecting us and vice versa. When they look at our officials sniping at each other left and right, they're wondering how our society, how our country is surviving this long. And it blows me away that they're becoming more and more American-like than they realize. Our influences have greatly challenged England, and everybody else has challenged traditions. The old guard is still being swept away, and the new guard is being put in, the new generations. But will they understand the pomp and circumstance as the older generation had? Will they understand the history and why England was? And the question is, will England be what the youth wanted or what the old guard are still trying to hold on to. And the truth, that kind of statement is the same thing we have to understand about ourselves as Americans. Because we also have the radicals. Well, we have to call them radicals because they're going against tradition, they're going against precedent, and they're going against traditions. And that's the hardest thing, because for those who've been endured and educated into what our past was and what it means, we're being challenged left and right. We're being challenged left and right. And even the old guard are still trying to figure out whether or not if the change in our government system is the only way to do it. A radical change? Try this one. There are people out there who still want the Constitution to be torn down. I come across it every once in a while on this one. Either by Twitter or by social media, or even when I hear their whispers of it somehow. The Constitution torn down and a new Constitution being put in place. You know what kind of a... That is going to be harder than anything else to deal with in my lifetime and on my concept. And I think I'd fight for the old Constitution rather than have it changed under any circumstance. I'm sorry. The older I get, I'm more of a traditionalist at this point. I'm traditionalist. I can't help it. I was raised under the Bill of Rights, the ability to speak my mind, regardless of what the government says or not. And I know there are conflicts, there are disputes, and there should be gray areas to talk about. But unfortunately, we've become more polarized and more divisive and derided than ever before. We tried to get our president in to break the crap that old number 45 had put us through. And we're still battling it out with all the extremists, as we call them. Because the old guard will not accept their dumbass ideas. And it's probably what some of the youth are thinking these days concerning about the monarchy of England. But keep this in mind. We're all tied together. We have our own country. We have our own issues left and right. But we are still tied to England, and England is still tied to us. And there's no way to change that for anything. Nowhere. Hats off to the new king and queen. And let's hope they fare better in the last days of their lives. We're faring better in our own right now.